welcome back to Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. My name is Turd Ferguson, and I am joined by my co-hosts, Mitchell and Christian. And today,
Zach tried to be creative.
We're going to talk about. All right, serious. We're going to talk about The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin's 1940 work of satire, which is in which he plays two different characters. He plays a Jewish barber, and he plays Adenoid Henkel, who is the dictator of a fictional nation called Tomania, and Henkel is persecuting the Jewish inhabitants of this nation in a rather obvious piece of satire here, and eventually the Jewish barber played by Chaplin is mistaken for Henkel. And I do mean eventually. On plot, this is a relatively light film, despite its quite long running time. But before we go into that to too great of an extent, let's start with opening thoughts like we always do. What did you guys think of The Great Dictator?
I'll go first this time around. I really like this film a lot.
Wow,
and
okay.
I am a big fan of historical context, and it's gonna need a lot of that. And
Yes.
That's my only major criticism. I think Charlie Chaplin is. I don't know how he's so smart. I have no idea how he became to be so. I just don't know. He just came out of the womb having so much in common with Hitler. And being able to satirize him, it was basically destined to happen.
Yeah, born
Like,
4
he
days
was
after Hitler.
4 days, yeah. And
wow.
he was born impoverished the same way, and this film exemplifies that tenfold. He was taking advantage of something that pretty much needed to be taken advantage of if he was going to make a significant creative feat, and I think it totally pays off in a lot of ways. I don't think that the comedy's necessarily consistently funny. I think there's moments that I think are funny, but just by virtue of the fact that it's older comedy, and I find that appealing. So it's like a nostalgia trip for a time I never lived in. Not that I would want to live through that, but but I have a high appreciation for how much effort he put into this, and especially being his first official sound film.
Yeah.
Is really insane. I mean, he's such a good actor too. It's kind of weird how good of an actor he is, not ever hearing his voice up to that point for a lot of people. And he making this film for a generation of people who were raised on sound films instead of silent ones. But I mean, I understand that the time period really hurts like a lot of the film that's more controversial, especially the persecution of the Jews is kind of generalized and extremely thin looking back on it. I, for one, tend to look at things pretty within historical context, and I think the time that this released is pretty much a perfect time to have ever satirized Hitler. Is pretty much exactly when you can make fun of him, when everybody was a really big fan of him. Over 95% of the U.S. was totally isolationist, neutral, and peaceful with Germany. The UK was obviously nervous at that point, so they didn't release this film immediately, but they used it as propaganda later on. And it plays into Charlie Chaplin's character so well. And as far as I've read and seen clips of him as the Tramp and things like that. In fact, the Little Tramp is another name for him.
Yeah.
And Hitler was called Little Corporal in World War I.
Ooh, I didn't know
another
that.
comparison. By generals who criticized him when he became dictator. And just subtle comparisons like that. The beer hall putsch, him being an inmate, is just like how Hitler was an inmate. So the Jewish barber is like, if a Jewish barber was a dictator, what would he say to the world? And just that message is so powerful. And that speech at the end was just totally made the movie for me. It was so well written. I mean, that's probably like one of the best speeches, if not the best I've ever heard in cinema, honestly. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I was almost crying. Like, that's how good it was.
Yeah.
And hats off to my bowler hat off to Charlie Chaplin. I think he did a magnificent job. This is like the first time I've actually fully, watched a Charlie Chaplin film, and I think he just did a really great job. Minus the obvious problem. I think all three of us generally see in it. But I give it a 4 out of 5. I highly recommend it.
All right. Well, Christian, I'm hearing a lot of humming and hawing from you. So what was your opinion?
No, I'm just anticipating that this will be a rougher episode for me.
Uh-oh.
I gave this a 2 out of 5, and I didn't really like it. I found parts to appreciate, and I understand why Chaplin is a legend, but I didn't really think this was funny. I'm not sure why that is, but I'll try to explain why. And I am going to bring up Jojo Rabbit, sorry, but I do think they're two kind of similar movies.
In a way, yeah.
If you look at what they're each trying to accomplish. And I struggle with Jojo Rabbit as well, because I feel like these really, I say this in my review, it's willing to invoke heavy atrocities in a satirical light without fully reckoning with the weight of the issues. It just feels really aggressively naive, like all the time. I don't think it's a light issue. I think it colors pretty much every joke in the movie, and maybe that's a personal problem, but I never laughed. There were a couple moments early on where I was like, oh, that's a good gag, but even the really good ones, I could. It was very obvious to me that Chaplin is a silent film guy, because much of his slapstick and most of the gags overall are not really dependent on sound at all, which I guess that isn't really a weakness, but just a note of style. And I don't know, man. I don't think calling Hitler Adenoid Hinkle is really funny, and I don't think like the nonsense speeches is really it just doesn't really do much for me. But I totally understand this being in 1940. I agree entirely with what Mitchell said. This is like the kind of the only and best time to satirize Hitler if you're going to do it, because this is when an audience is going to be most receptive to that message and when it makes the most sense to try to make this point. So, it's not, I don't think this is an awful film, but it just really, really doesn't work for me. I don't think Hitler making funny faces is funny or critically impressive, and that's just kind of where I'm at. I hope to enjoy this more than I did, and I'm going to give other Chaplin stuff a try, because he's clearly super clever and a very talented entertainer. But and I assume we're going to talk about the speech.
We will talk
detail,
about the speech further, yeah.
So I'll save my comments on that for later. But overall, this just did not resonate with me.
Okay. All right. Well, when we talked about this last time, we didn't talk about it a lot. When I introduced it in our last episode, I did mention that I had never seen this film until this episode. So I want to establish that I'm not coming into this as like, this is one of my favorite movies, how dare you. But I will say that I do disagree with you, Christian. I personally found this movie very funny. Now, I will agree with you that there are some jokes that are very much rooted in the silent tradition, and without kind of the style of silent film, they do suffer a little. One of the biggest ones for me is there's a scene towards the beginning where the Jewish barber, he's in World War One. What's very obviously World War One, and he's manning an anti-aircraft gun, and he gets in the seat and he starts winding it. Yeah. It's going all over the place, and I felt like if we just had some music and some sound effects here, and this was shot a little differently, this would be really funny. But because it's a talkie, it feels like Chaplin was like, no, we have to shoot this like a sound film. No, we can't use those silent techniques. And so it doesn't come across as funny. But I think there are other moments that really do. The German gibberish really works for me, partially because I think Chaplin does such a great job embodying Hitler's expressions and the way he moves his arms and the way he does speak, that it took me like a minute to recognize that he was just saying sauerkraut and random gibberish words, because I was convinced like, oh, okay, this is a language, and then I recognized partway through. This movie is really funny for me, but I will cede, structurally it is a total nightmare. The plot of this movie doesn't start to happen until like the last 15 minutes of its 2-hour runtime. And I do think for a lot of it, they really should have focused on either the barber or the dictator. Like they don't quite... You think it's going to be like a Prince and the Pauper thing, where it's like the dictator is going to get incapacitated or something, and the barber is going to end up in that position, and, oh, what would this meek little man do with all that power over a dictatorship that's this on the edge of war and conflict and doing these atrocious things, but it really doesn't come into that until the last 15 minutes, which I think is a weakness. But as we've all touched upon here, this movie obviously uses slapstick, and it uses absurdity, and it uses comedy to make light of Hitler, to make light of the Nazis, Germany, and even war in general. So I want to talk about this in a little more detail. Do you think that was effective, and do you think that's a valid goal in the first place? Even if you don't think it worked here, do you think that's something that you can pull off?
I'm going to say yes. I think you can pretty much get away with satirizing anything. And I know that sounds like a really bold claim, but satire by definition, you can pretty much satirize anything and get away with it with somebody. You can offend a lot of people, but any subject matter has the ability to be satirized. I am 100% behind satirizing the darkest of things, and I'm 100% behind creative vision. And as long as it's artistically, sound and has a vision and has a very reasonable message behind it, then I'm totally behind it. I watched the first half of Jojo Rabbit. I intend to watch the entire thing all the way through and review it at some point. I did not feel like Jojo Rabbit was very intelligent. I felt like some of the gags were pretty intelligent, but the overall message was very stale, and I felt like I've heard the same, any hate stuff for so long, and it did not feel very original to me at all, and it did not feel substantive. This is literally baked in the substance. It was made in the substance, right? And it was like he was writing this, he wrote it this, months after, during and months after, Anschluss happened. He was writing about it the second it was happening. The speech at the end is a satirization of Hitler's speech about annexing Austria.
It was written in response to that, yeah.
Yeah, and just I'm totally behind that, and with the knowledge that he had at the time, and with the knowledge that most people and the general public did at the time, I think it's perfectly applicable. I do not fault him at all, and I believe in a later 1960s memoir or something. Chaplin said I would have not done this at all if I had known about the atrocities or anything about mass extermination and the concentration camp full extent and things like that. So I am perfectly fine with the fact that it satirizes it. I forget what other parts of the question you had, Zach, but I'm. Is that pretty much? Okay,
you pretty much
good.
covered the basis there.
All right. I'm perfectly fine with it. I think it's fine. I think you just have to respect the time that it was made in, and just know going into it when it was made and kind of knowing the general context. The more context you know, the better. Especially watching Triumph of the Will, I think will really, really help. Charlie Chaplin said this is literally a comedy routine, and I've never taken that perspective before. But watching parts of Triumph of the Will without thinking about the actual implications of it and thinking how just comedic it is in general.
Yeah.
And then Charlie Chaplin spinning the evil back, under the iceberg kind of message, and flipping it on its head at the very end is just I think that works great. I don't think that specific message has aged at all, pretty much. I think that's just a fine message. Liberty and democracy, I think most people can get behind these days. So, yeah, that's my response there.
Oh, I want to talk about the speech so bad.
Okay. We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. I'm sorry.
That's a really good question, Zach. Conceptually, I have absolutely no problem with satirizing or attempting to satirize pretty much anything. I think Mitchell is spot on in that regard. And I mean, yeah, you're always going to risk offending someone when you're dealing with a sensitive subject matter. But my issue with this is not, I wasn't really offended. I just didn't think it was funny or effective for me. Mm-hmm. And I agree with what Mitchell said about Jojo Rabbit. I think it's a little less substantive than this is, but at the same time, this is and I can appreciate that this is baked in the time period, and I do think that's a credit to it. And everything I'm saying has to be tempered by realizing that, and by judging it by 1940, which I can't do, but I'm going to try to do anyway. Yeah. Despite all that, I still think it's really, the speech is a problem for me.
Really?
It is a little bit, and I'm gonna bring up our prior episode, Zach, because I can.
Which
we'll go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, the Casablanca.
Sure.
And where you said the La Marseillaise scene was a little schmaltzy for you, which I disagree with, but can understand. I think that this speech is really, really schmaltzy. Like,
okay.
Like
well,
to the tens. Like, and I don't know. Somebody on Letterboxd, their review was, and maybe this is a reflection of a personal failure on my part rather than the film's failure. Someone on Letterboxd said, "I think if everyone on Earth took a few minutes and listened to that final speech, the world would be a much better place." And I don't think that's true. I think the speech is powerful and well written, but I think he's overestimating how much effect he has on other people in that speech, and I think it's a little like too far reaching. Yeah, yay democracy and all that, rah rah. But what does he say? He says like, bring down national borders, and he's like, I can tell Chaplin's like really relishing the opportunity to talk now because this is a talking picture, and it's not. It didn't work for me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But
politics in my parlor.
I'm not conceptually. Yes, I'm sorry, Mitch.
I'm just kidding.
I'm not conceptually opposed to satirizing anything, but I have yet to see a film that satirizes these events successfully for me. We've watched a lot of World War II movies that have to grapple with this subject matter as a group, not even just on this podcast, but
yeah, we had a lot of preparation for this.
We've seen a lot of these movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe that overexposure to the material is making me more sensitive to the way it is handled. Okay. I don't know. I can't explain why I feel this way, but it just doesn't work for me.
Okay. All right. So I guess we will talk about the speech now, just because Christian's kind of leaked into that at this point. But first, I will address the comedy here. I think that when looking at this from the context of now, it can be a little difficult to get over the fact that this is essentially creating comedy out of what became some of the greatest atrocities of all time. At the time, of course, really nobody in the U.S. was aware of that. And like you said, Mitchell, Chaplin later said, if I had known what was happening in the concentration camps, I never would have made this movie. Because if you look at it through that lens and don't recognize they didn't know that was happening, then
right.
it can look kind of monstrously insensitive. But I also think that if you place evil on a pillar and say, this is the most evil thing, fear this and loathe this, in a way you give it power. Now, it's important to address evil from a serious perspective, but you did give it power, you give it a legacy, you make it something to fear. When you make evil a joke, there is no rebuttal. Goebbels notoriously hated this movie because he couldn't respond to it. Because if he responds to the Charlie Chaplin movie, it makes the Nazis look incredibly petty, and like this little entertainer from America has this huge impact on them. When he did, Goebbels hated it and banned the movie. In occupied nations, they would sneak prints of this movie in and screen them secretly, almost as like a form of protest. Hitler watched the movie twice, apparently, in total privacy, and nobody knows what he thought of it. But I feel like those are historical examples of this having some effect as a satire and humor against evil being effective. I think Mitchell, you referred to that actually in your review, how it can't be the only way you address something like this, of course. Like, you can't just turn Hitler into a clown. It's important to recognize the actual actions that this regime took and the horrible things that they did. But I think at the time, turning Hitler and his regime into a total mockery has some effect, because it takes away that strength that they hold from the newsreels, and it takes away that strength that their actions seem to give them, and it shows that these are people that can be beaten, and I think that's important. But let's talk about the speech. But before I give my thoughts on the speech, Mitchell, did you have any thoughts on that final speech that you'd like to share?
I'm gonna add some additional clarification. Charlie Chaplin was talking in a very similar way to how the Allied leaders were speaking at the end of World War II. And it was highly prospective, completely unintentionally highly prospective, because Charlie Chaplin barely even knew there was going to be a war. I mean, obviously there was an impending brewing something, but he didn't know if there was a war, how it would play out. In the film, it's pretty apparent because he's showing that they're having kind of they're showing the perspective of Mussolini or Napolini, I think is Napolini, and Hinkle watching the planes spin around and crash. And if anybody knows anything about World War II history, the German planes were awesome compared to most planes at the time, just factually. But I mean, just things like that. Nothing he could have anticipated, right? It's for me, it's more of an artistic kind of lashing out. It's less like I'm a politician and I know what I'm talking about kind of speech, and more like this is my creative message to the people. This is what everybody should be aware of. This is what people should be cautioned about. Because we've been through this dictator stuff before, and we know that empires fall all the time, and the way of the world is not dictated by dictators, it's dictated by the people. And that perspective sounds kind of convoluted and a little bit weird to a lot of people today. Kind of the globalist versus nationalist kind of discussion is completely different now, compared to how it was then. I mean, being a nationalist versus a globalist was an entirely different meaning at the time. So I appreciate his perspective, and I really appreciate the fact that he's able to speak out at that time period where he got tons of hate mail from Nazi sympathizers, all from Europe and from the U.S. and everywhere. Because a lot of people, I mean, Hitler was Time Magazine of the Year. He was Man of the Year, Time Magazine in 1936. So most people were happy for Germany for that this was happening to them, and he was the minority opinion at the time. So that's what I think is the most valuable thing about the speech. I think that understand that him staring into the camera is literally just a direct, it's a direct professing of his opinions as a person. But he kind of built the story to lead up of what story there is. He kind of built up that character and the story up to that point on purpose as a direct counter to Hitler, because Hitler was constantly making these bombastic speeches that didn't mean anything. It was literally gibberish to him, to Charlie Chaplin. And he wanted to profess his own opinion and give his own perspective as an artist about how he felt, and I don't have any problem with that at all. And I think it was a great direct counter. What if I was Hitler and I had to say something substantive? What would I say to the people? And then everybody cheered, irony. So yeah, I think it works great in the context of the film and in the context of the historical context. And I think it's a great speech, and I think it's delivered very effectively in that sense. So
yeah, and I kind of want to. So I understand, Christian, what you're saying about kind of that speech, looking out to the audience in a way that the rest of the film necessarily doesn't. But for me, the reason that doesn't necessarily feel schmaltzy, whereas something like Vive la France in Casablanca does, is that there's no shred of artifice or of injected sentimentality to it. For me, that speech is so direct, and it's so clearly Chaplin taking advantage of his reputation as an entertainer, because he was a major star at the time, and getting up in front of the world, it's basically to say, all right, we have to do something. It's very clear throughout. I mean, the character is clearly speaking of like, oh, millions of people can hear me around the world now, like through radio within the context of the film, but it's very obvious that Chaplin's speaking of himself, speaking to people through cinemas, and reaching out to people to say, this isn't right, we have to do something. And I think even if you aren't necessarily an especially patriotic, which I'm not targeting this at you, Christian, but I'm saying that anybody who watches this film, I think, can find some effectiveness in that speech, because it is, I think, so well written and so well delivered, and the way he ramps up towards the end. I think even though Chaplin was a silent star, this being his first sound film, yes, a lot of the gags don't rely on sound, but I think that's because he's saving the sound for a moment when he can really do something with sound that he never could have with silent film. I mean, that speech would never work with title cards. Like, it wouldn't have that pace, it wouldn't have that build-up. And
right.
So I do think that ending speech is just beautiful, and I will agree with you, Mitchell. I was tearing up a little bit, which doesn't often happen to me in films. But But Christian, we have kind of sidelined you for a little while. Anything else you wanted to add on the speech that you might have been holding back before?
Yeah. Well, first, I think to me it's a misinterpretation to fixate on the mentioning of France as an artifice in the other speech, or the other instance, because I still see that as an allegory of, or a more metaphorical sense of democracy versus authoritarianism. The same way that this speech is pretty pointedly pro-democracy and anti-authoritarian. So for this, it's well written in a literal sense, but it's too long. It's like, it's vaguely anti-industry, I guess, when he's like, I don't know, he's talking about being, I understand the idea of being more man than machine, but it feels a little like anecdotal.
So,
and
I don't want to interrupt you here, and I know we try not to have our politics interfere here, and I'm not going to go too deep into individual political opinions, but do you think this could be part of your I want policy rather than ideals kind of mentality, maybe leaking into your perspective on the script at all? That's a genuine question.
I think that's a fair question, and I mean, maybe, but this is an overarching issue that I have with this, not just with this speech, but with this movie and with Jojo Rabbit and with any political satire. Is it's happy to dangle the car keys of the issues in front of you without really grappling with them in a complete way for me. And also, Zach, you mentioned that Chaplin may not have known about the extent of the brutality of the concentration camps, but at the same time, he can't really plead total ignorance to what was happening, because he obviously depicts Jews in the ghetto, and so there are levels to it, and I want to acknowledge that. Like, I didn't give this a 1, and I'm not indicting Chaplin morally. To me, it's just more. It's not really especially effective to me.
Okay. Sure.
I have difficulty explaining why.
Yeah,
but that's fine.
Yeah.
I will just point out that the Jews were in the ghetto at the time of this film being made, but Mitchell, you can fact check me here, but I don't believe that most of America knew about the concentration camps and the gas chambers and whatnot until afterward.
Yeah,
which I think is the real, like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have touched that thing.
I know what Christian's saying. I'm just, it's hard. It's very hard for us to put. Everybody had a different amount of knowledge, right? Yeah. And I totally understand what Christian's saying, and I think that just by virtue of the fact that there were camps for them is already, crossing a boundary. I understand that. But yes, clarification for anybody who doesn't know that most Americans knew that the concentration camps existed. They didn't know the exact purpose of them, nor were they like a major political discussion. It's kind of like talking about climate change in the 1940s, like everybody kind of cares about the war, nobody really cares about other stuff. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, people people were not involved in European affairs as much, and even Europeans to a good extent also didn't know. But yeah, I understand completely that perspective, Christian.
Okay, all right. And final clarification here. I just want to make it perfectly clear that we're talking about Casablanca again for some reason. For me, the presentational aspect of Casablanca doesn't come in with the mention of France. It's more kind of the way it's filmed as opposed to the way that the speech is filmed. But we can actually, that segues into the next question pretty well. Charlie Chaplin had a major part in this film, of course. In addition to being in 2 roles, he also wrote, produced, directed, and scored the movie. So I wanted to ask here, first off, do we think he's convincing as 2 different characters? And secondly, what do we think of him as an auteur? What kind of stamp do you think he leaves on this movie as a creator or a filmmaker?
I think that the Jewish barber is a little bit too reminiscent of his usual tramp character. I feel like he's a little bit too generic, a little bit too gaggy. Even though I really like that scene with the when he's actually cutting the guy's he's shaving him
with the music.
I love that scene a lot. It makes no sense in context of what's going on, but and that tends to happen a lot. With the coins and the brownies or whatever those were, the pastries,
puddings.
And just random stuff like that only really happens with the Jewish barber. But I mean, he's not really trying to fulfill a big purpose with that, so it doesn't really bother me that much. I think it was passable. I don't think it was too big of a deal to me. You kind of accept that early on. But as an author, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he clearly he's a talent. Like I said, I mean, the writing is pretty good. I think for being the first sound film, and the execution of the lines is great, good to great most of the time. I don't feel like he's. I mean, I feel like with satire, there's not a whole lot you really need to there's not a whole lot you really need to get down with the story for it to be good necessarily. As long as there's some, reminiscence, you have some idea of what's going on and the events that are being referenced. I think that's pretty much good. That's pretty much passable. And any messaging after that is up to him. But I mean, I don't know. I think it's really good. None of the cinematography is particularly memorable. I mean, nothing really sticks out too much besides anything we've already mentioned in terms of the satire. So.
Christian?
Yeah. Gosh. I had something really specific today to say, and then it totally slipped my mind. Chaplin is an author. Chaplin.
I can speak and we can come back to you if you'd like.
Yeah, do that.
Well, I'm pretty much going to agree with you here, Mitchell, in that I think Chaplin's main skills lie as an entertainer. He came up in vaudeville. He performed on stage initially. So I think when he's performing, when he's doing his comic gags, it's clear that he's a great physical performer. There's something about him in the way that he does stunts and pratfalls and gags and things along those lines that indicate that he is a great comedic slapstick thinker in terms of movement and coming up with jokes and things like that. As a filmmaker, clearly structure and plot structure isn't necessarily his forte, as we've mentioned with this movie. And I do think it's clear a lot of the time that his concern as a director is, can you see me? Good. And that's pretty much it. Which I think you kind of need if you're going to do slapstick. And I think works in the final speech because it's very direct. It's mostly a single shot of him that pulls back and then goes forward again. So it works there. But there are some scenes where it's kind of a matter of, oh, okay, we've been in this wide shot for a while. Okay, we're going to pan now. Nope, now we're going back. Like, it is a very kind of simplistically constructed film, which it was nominated for quite a few Academy Awards when it came out, which I think makes sense because of the relevance and what it's saying. It's a film that speaks to the time, but if this movie were to come out a few years later, I don't necessarily think it would receive anywhere near as many nominations. But yeah, I think his main skills lie as a performer, and I think he does a good job differentiating Hinkle from the Jewish barber as characters. But like you said, it's all the whole movie basically is in broad strokes. So him as an auteur and as a filmmaker and as a performer, it's not too hard to differentiate those characters. Have I given you enough time, Christian?
Yes.
Okay.
I was gonna harken back to my loyalty to a man named George, and how
Lord
much I care
George.
about sound. And I don't notice it. I don't notice how important it is until it's not there.
Yeah.
And it is really evident in this movie. The sounds are like people talking, a few gunshots, occasionally some score, and that's kind of it. Like, the sound is really, really dead for a lot of the movie, and that is just inherently less stimulating, and I think distances the audience a lot more than if there's more things to hear to go along with that image. And I mean, that's to be expected because he came from the silent background. But and I do think, like Zach said, it's pretty like self-centered on him in terms of what he wants to draw attention to, and I think it works. And obviously he's an amazing talent, but I have to wonder if that was also a limitation, if he had to star in both roles and do absolutely everything himself, But I mean, he's clearly talented. I'm not going to sit here and say Chaplin isn't talented.
I'll definitely agree with you on the sound, Christian. It's weird because in his silent movies, Chaplin uses sound so well. There's all kinds of interesting sound effects and music and things like Modern Times and City Lights. But like a lot of silent filmmakers, as soon as he switched to sound, he seemed to think, okay, we have voices, so we can forget about all that. When you really shouldn't. You need all of it, Charlie. And it took a while for a lot of different silent filmmakers to recognize that when they went to sound. But all right. I'm running us into overtime a little bit already. So any final thoughts on The Great Dictator before we move on to our segments?
I think it's a great example of satire. I think if you are at all interested in satire, I would recommend giving it a chance, and I think it's definitely worth it. If you're a silent film fan and want to see what happens when you give Charlie Chaplin the tools he never had. That'll be a very interesting time for you. But just know when it came out, he was writing the story like I think 1938. I think late 1937 into 1938, 1939. He started filming like a few days or 6 days or something after the invasion of Poland. So knowing the historical context is extremely important, okay? And I feel like knowing more of that will enhance your enjoyment of the film, for sure. But ultimately, I feel like if you are at all interested in Charlie Chaplin and you're at all interested in the subject matter, I recommend it. I think it's a great watch. 4 out of 5.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I really think this is one of our rare disagreements where I will say it is like very, very, very subjective. And if I was coming at you from 1940, I'm sure I wouldn't be saying half of the things I'm saying now. But at the same time, I do think the final speech is like very, very idealized without having a lot of direction, like quoting the Bible and quoting and bringing like lofty statements about humanity and really like soaking up the screen and literally looking directly in the camera, and it's pretty abrupt following everything else in the movie. So the speech I had difficulty with, even if I can admit it was well written. And like Mussolini is named Benzino Napoloni of bacteria. Like, yeah. I don't think that's funny. I think that's kind of dumb.
I don't know, very
man.
funny.
Imagine it's 1940 and somebody's calling Italy bacteria.
Yeah. Okay.
And Mussolini's still alive.
Yeah, but I don't know, man.
He's straight vibing, dude.
He was then.
Yeah, R.I.P. R.I.H.
Yeah. I don't know, guys. It just was not for me.
I understand.
Yeah, 2 out of 5. I tried, Zach. I really did.
I do think you have a point that I think the movie does suffer nowadays in that the air has been taken out of the balloons that this movie was deflating at the time. Like, with Hitler and Mussolini still in power in the 40s, like, some of the jokes in this would have seemed even maybe kind of daring, but with them long dead and kind of not dismissed, but commonly seen as like these are evil, horrific men by a modern perspective. It maybe seems kind of like low-hanging fruit now, where it might not have been in the 1940s. I will say this is one of Chaplin's most influential movies. I don't think it's his best. Things like City Lights, Modern Times, The Gold Rush. He does have, I think, funnier silent comedies, and maybe we'll talk about some of those on the show in the future. But for now, The Great Dictator, 4 out of 5. It's got a lot of problems, but I still think there's something kind of charming about it, kind of endearing about it, regardless, that makes me rate it a little bit higher than maybe it deserves. Were you going to say something, Christian?
No, it was just an eyebrow raise at... I found your final comments intriguing and entertaining. Please carry on.
Oh, okay. Well, those were my final comments. So there we go. It gets a 4 out of 5 because, I can't help but laugh. Okay.
Okay, I like that. I like
Zach's
that.
Evil.
Zach.
He's an evil man. We have to invade Austerlitz.
Okay.
Oh no.
Week in
That's
review.
Austria, by the way.
Yes.
Week in review.
Week in review. We're recording quite a few of these episodes back to back, so we might not have much of a week to review. But what have you guys been watching since our last episode?
This will make Christian happy. He's not allowed to talk. I'm taking the reins this time. We're with the carriage of cookie pocketness. And today I'm going to briefly discuss regular show.
Whoa.
Oh, okay, shut up, Christian. Get out. Regular show is probably at least the second best. Everybody settle down about Adventure Time. Shut the hell up about Adventure Time, okay? Adventure Time is great, okay, but regular show is possibly greater. Okay, it's better. And I'm just not even going to give it a... You know what? It's a park, all right? It's a park. Stuff happens. It's regular. Nothing crazy happens. A lot of the jokes are consistently relevant. I feel like the mixture of really surprisingly like going from children jokes to adolescent jokes to adult jokes in like a span of 5 minutes is so effectively, it's well done all the time. All of the specials are really good. The Halloween specials are good. I don't know about the Christmas ones. They're all right, but the movie's all right. I mean, I think I read Christian's review. Yeah, it shouldn't be a movie, but I mean, it's all right. I highly recommend it. If you're looking for any cartoons to watch and you haven't watched regular show, I highly recommend watching it. I'm on season 5 right now officially, even though I think I've seen season 5 when it came out a million years ago. And I've yet to finish it. I know what happens at the end. Everybody shut up. But I'm almost done. And yes, I'm watching it. I'm 20 years old, and I used to watch it many years ago, many moons ago. And it's just so good. I mean, it's like it's just watching these two fools mess around and just like cause ruckuses and the deadpan humor and stuff. It's so well done. And even as a cartoon, I think there's a lot of charm to it and a lot of respectability. And Mark Hamill is whatever, an ape or whatever, I forget. What is it?
Yeti.
Okay, I want to make sure I was saying it right. He's Yeti.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I've been watching a regular show for years. I happened to start watching it again for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, highly recommend it.
Need more coffee.
You're not going to finish the rest of that line. Keep going, Christian.
Is that what that's from?
Sorry. Yes.
I never knew.
Yeah. You're learning something new every day, Zach.
If you watch the episode.
Yeah. I second that, by the way. Oh my gosh. Regular show. So good. What have I been watching? I watched Muppet Vision 4D in Orlando, Florida. And it was really fun. The Muppets get into some hijinks with new 3D technology. And there's kind of an annoying new character that takes up a little too much time, but there's a cute thing going on with Bean Bunny. And maybe my favorite part is the pre-show. Before you walk in, there are these TVs set up, and Sam the Eagle is lecturing you about the rules. And then Gonzo brings out Rizzo the Rat in a Mickey Mouse costume, and it's very funny. And I like the Muppets, so you know what? Go watch some Muppets, dear listener.
Well,
go to Orlando, Florida while you're at it.
Christian watched the Muppets 3D. I watched a Crest advert in a subway station. It was great. No. So okay.
Oh my God.
Yikes.
In the first installment of Zach, you listened to that. I'm going to be talking about Machine Gun Kelly's Tickets to My Downfall.
Oh no!
Oh man!
Which is
time to go.
Yeah.
Which is a recent pop punk album by Colson Baker, also known as Machine Gun Kelly, and it's an album that I really enjoy. I'm not really big on Machine Gun Kelly's rap style. This is a genre that personally I don't find much appealing. But Tickets to My Downfall, the pop punk thing, I really, really enjoy. I think that the appeals to kind of depression and feeling and romance are all rather sophomoric, which is kind of a trait of a lot of pop punk music, dealing with those sorts of things from a very kind of high school perspective. But I think that the music is great. The songs themselves are really fun and really catchy. There are a couple that are sort of, okay, cry me a river, let's move on. But I think for most of them, including the singles, are a lot of fun. And it's an album that I give a 4 out of 5 and enjoy a lot. Possibly much to Christian's chagrin. But we're going to move on before he can chagrin all over this place.
Is it over?
These are some crazy sophomoric? What? Does that mean being a sophomore?
We'll talk about it later, Mitchell.
Hey, Mitchell, can you shoot me dead now, please?
Yeah, with my machine gun.
Yes, that's a nice transition.
No.
This is a comedy, but there's plenty of weaponry in it. So it's now time for Mitchell's Munitions Minute. Mitchell, you have a minute to talk about military-grade weaponry in The Great Dictator. In 3, 2,
Well, I wasn't ready yet, again. But hey, that's right. The Krag Jorgensen is a rifle they use quite often in this film. It is the Constabulary Carbine edition, which is like Springfield buying a bunch of Norwegian guns and saying, this is ours now. But they have a bayonet lug now. They're special rifles because they take rounds on the side under the bolt instead of on the top, which turned out to be a pretty crappy design. They were designed in the late 1890s. A lot of World War I rifles were made during that time, like the Mauser Carabiner 98, and the Springfield 1903 was made a little bit later. All of those were better because you could use clips, so you can use on block, multiple, cartridges at once instead of just, one round at a time. So pretty crappy guns. I'm sure Charlie was like, let's find the cheapest rifles that looked like the closest real thing. They're chambered in 30-40 Korg, or Krag. Oh, Korg. Oh, no. Thor Ragnarok. But yeah, and MCU now. But yeah, made their own cartridges for it. So nobody ever used it. So there you go.
All right. That was pretty concise. I ran over by a few seconds, but I think if we compensate for the amount that you
just
weren't
cut out
ready.
the Korg part. I'm made out of ropes.
All right. So now I believe it's time for the rundown.
Yes. The Magical Cinema Tour bus has a flat tire, but we're repairing it. Okay.
Do you even know how to do that, Christian?
No, he's got a tire patch kit. He's got a tire patch kit in the back. Failing that, he'll call his insurance company.
Yeah.
USA. Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready, spaghetti. Let's go.
All right, Zach. We're about to find out if you think hair garbage is funny. Are you ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, go.
Herring und garbage.
3 out of 5.
Humanity getting kicked around a little.
4 out of 5.
Big Bertha.
3 out of 5.
General smell awful.
2 out of 5.
The Thinker of Tomorrow.
3 out of 5.
Depression in all caps.
4 out of 5.
All Great Men Being Absent-Minded.
3 out of 5.
Coughing for emphasis.
3 out of 5.
Brahms Hungarian Dance number 5.
2 out of 5.
Translating stunk 3 different ways.
3 out of 5.
Zach Garrigus as Mr. Man.
4 out of 5.
Giving her tomatoes back.
3 out of 5.
Loving the Hardship and Prosecution.
3 out of 5.
The mustache.
4 out of 5.
Herring Abuse.
3 out of 5.
Stormtroopers.
4 out of 5.
Benzino Napolini of Bacteria.
3 out of 5.
Doing away with national borders.
4 out of 5.
What do, you salami?
3 out of 5.
The name of democracy.
4 out of 5.
That speech.
5 out of 5.
Wow. Treaties not mattering.
3 out of 5.
And that was it with 3 seconds to spare.
I knew stormtroopers were going to be on there. I should have made a note of it so I
We
could
said
show
it like 12 times, man. What was I supposed to do?
I knew it.
Stormtrooper Star Wars?
Well, I wouldn't have done that, but I knew.
Who put my Star Wars in The Great Dictator again?
I did not. You know what? I know. Leave George alone.
Oh, we're just going to make him say Stormtroopers 12 times.
Okay. Well, with that being that, next time, Mitchell, you will be hosting. So what will we be talking about next time?
I'm never ready for anything, but we're talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 1988.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those movies where I'm like the only one in my family that really, really likes it, and everyone else just kind of likes it. Robert Zemeckis directed it.
Yeah.
Bobby.
Yeah, $300 million in the box office. Bob Hoskins, Christopher Lloyd, R.I.P. He's just freaking dead.
R.I.P.
Yeah.
Did he die like yesterday? I thought he was still alive.
I think he's alive.
No, I'm just spoiling the movie. But anyway,
Oh, no.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I know who framed Roger Rabbit.
Okay, well, don't tell them.
Zach Garrigus framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh no!
Everyone, arrest this man.
But it will be a special episode. I'm just gonna say that.
Okay. Well, on
It's a
that
special
bombshell, I have...
Arrest Zach Garrigus.
Okay, well, as the FBI breaks down my door, I've overrun shamelessly. But until next time, this has been Turd Ferguson for Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. Goodbye.
Turd Ferguson.
Please.